Thank you so much, Sumit. And hi, Manish. We normally in all conferences that we have hosted and I've seen, equity is the rock star and fixed income is a poor country cousin. But the mood right now is quite the reverse. Fixed income is where people have most questions, most issues, and therefore I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who have many things that they want to ask, from you, and I'll try my best to capture some of that. Before I kick off into some of the issues that are topmost in people's minds, I must say that from my own selfish point of view, one thing that I was really looking forward to speaking with you on is your macro views. Over the years, I have been tracking a lot of your macro notes, and what I really liked about that is that you don't sugarcoat, you just say it as it is, and that gives us as readers a very, very good perspective. And frankly, with COVID and with the pandemic and its aftermath, we really need a lot more of inputs on what's the macro situation looking like. But we'll have to wait for that for a later part in this conversation, because like I said, the top of mind for most people right now is what the hell is happening with credit funds, and why did this happen and why did that happen. And there are a lot of emotions that are flowing. It's an 18-month-old saga from ILFS to the unfortunate decision of FT to wind down some of its credit suite of funds. I guess the big question that people are asking for, if you really want some closure on what's happening, is, with everything that's happened in the last 18 months, can we take a step back and try and distinguish what out of whatever happened were mistakes that we as an industry have made, and what out of those are market risks that distributors and investors have to accept as a way of life when investing in the fixed income space?
Okay, Vijay. So, I think almost every risk, when it materializes in hindsight, appears like a mistake. Okay, so I have to admit. And which is why, we all are students of history, we ought to learn from history. And, there are many learnings because of this credit crisis. All of us are better equipped to deal with, a similar crisis if it were to recur maybe a couple of years later. So, but I would sort of, I would think that, majority of what played out, was a market risk. And let me sort of give you a context of it. There are various ways to look at the losses which happen in fixed income funds. One way is what I was trying to explain, that the cumulative write-offs that industry would do in 2018 and 19 and 20 would be about 12, 13, 14,000 crore, somewhere there.
Right.
12 lakh crore industry, that's just about 1%. Okay, now is it big? Is it very high? Of course, when I lose $1, it appears very, very big. But now,
when you translate it to 1% NPA, it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, but you ought to contextualize in terms of what has been happening to credit markets as such. And I'll give you 2 or 3 data points, and for the viewers to understand. One is that, let's say, had you invested 100% of your money in equal weight AAAs, okay, then also you would have lost about a percentage. Industry actually was 25-30% in AA and below, and yet it lost just about 1%. Okay, that's one, and that's cumulative. Number 2 is that other financial intermediaries such as banks and NBFCs, wrong to compare, because we are agents of investors' money. But again, in the context that we lived in, banks actually, the gross NPAs of banks are about 9-10%. They've written off 7%. So the gross NPA plus the write-offs equivalent is 16-17%. So that's the extent of credit crisis we've seen, where the AAAs collapsed, where the large borrowers, more than 100 crores, if you borrowed in India in 2014, 25% of them actually have gone down and defaulted. So in that backdrop, I shall say that MFs in aggregate actually did well, and some of the risk which played out was actually, or rather large part of the risk which played out was actually market risk. That's one way to look at it. Now, we all have to understand, and this is a small intervention here, and then I'll leave it to you, that look at, any asset class. Even the most benign asset class that you could think of is government bond. How can there be risk in government bond? But you as a distributor and advisor know this. Then in last 15 years, there have been 5 years that government bonds actually give you negative returns. In 2010 beginning, had you invested in a government bond, you would have earned about 13% negative return and concluded that what the hell is this? How could I earn such little return from a government bond? How could risk materialize in a government bond? But again, that's a part of cycle. Concluding not investing in government bond then and investing in fixed deposit, and I know would have been a wrong call. Because government bond fund over next 10 years after December 2010 delivered close to 9.5% versus fixed deposit would have earned you less than 7%. Okay, so that's another context of looking at market risk, that even a government bond, when it gets into a bad cycle, delivers a very bad return.
Right.
That's not a mistake of that asset. It's just that some of the risk materializes.
Yeah, but that is mark to market. You're talking about a mark to market loss, which if I stay invested, then I can recoup that, right? In a gilt fund kind of a thing. If I stay invested till maturity, then it's no longer a risk. Whereas here we've seen write-offs. And your point, Manish, is well taken about the context, which is the 1% NPA for the industry, which is something that we ought to take cognizance of. If I can play devil's advocate on that, of course, there is, a banking sector NPA is also inflated because we know there's a hell of a lot of social pressure, and there is, all kinds of other priority sector lending. This that you are under no such compulsions to, lend where certain babus tell you to lend or any of that. I mean, you're professionals and so on and so forth. So to that extent, that no, but if you were to really put hand on heart, I'm sure there must be some mistakes that we have made. Nobody is perfect. We all have, our share of learnings from whatever has happened in the last 18 months. So if we set aside the argument on market risk, which is well understood and well contextualized, what are some of the things that in hindsight we ought not to have done in the last 18 months?
No, there are many learnings, and I promised that I'm going to write a book on it. Okay, so
Oh wow, okay.
So many learnings, and I hope I'm not fired for that. But nonetheless, you
can always write after you're fired. It'll be an even bigger bestseller.
Look, there are many learnings. Okay, I have to admit, there are good learnings and there are bad learnings. So let me state the good learnings.
Okay.
One is as an asset manager, now we know in hindsight that the fixed income AUM can dwindle, and the investor is prone to groupthink. Okay. Frankly, I've been an absolute admirer of Franklin's liability franchise, but there is a bit of a shock in the manner that there is a run which sort of played out even on a franchise which actually had a reasonable liability franchise, So knowing this very well, I have to admit that, our view that, we could take 3-4% in a group or a company was the wrong call. We thought 3 or 4% is fine. But that 3-4% actually, when risk materializes, in the run up to that point, it becomes 10% because people run. So I think that's a big learning, which is a very simple one that, okay, cannot run more than 1 to 2% in anything which could potentially be risky in any part of the cycle. If you're a metal company or if you're a lower rated microfinance company, you can't have more than 1% exposure. Okay, that's a big picture understanding on the asset side. The second we realized, of course, is that, in India, for whatever reasons, I think our law is relatively weak. The contracts are not yet executed well. We realized that the group's influence on a good company of a group, could be very high. You look at our case, okay, classic case of, IL&FS. I didn't lend to IL&FS Bigco, okay? So we thought that it was weak. We lent to a good company of IL&FS called Jharkhand Road Projects. It was an annuity. But to our surprise and shock, even that went down and it didn't pay us for a couple of months. We fought with them and then we started to get our money back. Nonetheless, the learning is that the infiltration of a group is very high, even in a good company. So the weak company, good group combination perhaps does not work. So that's at asset level. But then there are many learnings for the business and liability level also. howsoever diversified that your liability is. As I said, the group thing dominates. The run will happen every 10th year, irrespective of howsoever diversified that franchise is. And therefore, I think the conclusion for us is that though the big wall for an investor is only tax shield, that he will like to finish his 3 year. And therefore, I think we cannot take more than a certain amount in our credit funds or any fund which potentially take credit risk more than a certain amount. So that's on the liability side. And the quick one on the product side, I think there's absolutely no way that we promised ourselves we'll not do credit FMPs. We anyway did not do much. But in credit FMP, the problem is that you give us only 15 days, 30 days to complete the portfolio construction. There's absolutely no way that my fund managers can look for 40 securities there. So you invariably are exposed to much higher concentration. So my request to all my brothers and sisters, across fund management communities, that let's just stop this. We will not
absolutely
credit FMPs. So that's another learning at a product level.
So it's interesting you touched upon credit FMPs, because if I understand the biggest angst among distributors is not so much about the credit accidents that have happened in credit risk funds, but about cross contamination, saying, look, credit risk funds, okay, I'm supposed to have understood the risks, I'm supposed to have communicated the risks to my clients, etc., etc. And there the time horizon where was always prescribed, thanks to tax laws, was 3 years plus, and so on and so forth. But we never, thought that it will get, this kind of credit risks will contaminate a lot of the shorter duration products where the investor's time horizon is 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Or like, let's say a 1 year FMP, short-term funds, ultra short-term funds. That is where the biggest angst is, because you don't have time on your hands to really, salvage the situation or hold on to maturity and so on and so forth. So is there something that, at an industry level, we can sort of arrive at any form of a consensus saying, look, let's contain credit risk only into the bucket where it ought to be?
I'm afraid, we're going to get there unless, you and me and everyone agrees to not do this. It will be wrong to not run credit risk in an ultra short-term fund, but it will also be wrong to call it an ultra short-term fund.
Okay.
Call this idea that we have peddled, as an industry, that this is a low duration fund and my low duration is better than your low duration. Therefore, you should come to me because my YTM is higher. Now, I hope people have learned this, that, it is not the same low duration. It's only from a duration metric, your risk is same. But on the credit metric, it is different. Correct. Now, the answer to this is, unfortunately, not to have a credit risk-oriented low duration fund. It's a legitimate risk capital, which you and I may want to participate in. Okay. So I hope our regulators do not shun this completely. Yet it is on us as fund managers to put it out in public domain that my low duration is actually a non-credit low duration, whereas let's say Franklin's low duration has a little bit of a credit in it, which in good times will do very well, maybe in bad times it will not do so well. So I think the learning for me and for my community is to put out binding constraints.
Yeah, correct.
This low duration fund of mine would only do so much for you. It will run lower than 1 year duration. It will not run anything which is less than AA minus. It will not buy anything more than 1% of a portfolio if it is non-AAA. And that's it. And
So are these the constraints you put on your product suite?
Absolutely. We put out a binding constraint about 8-9 months ago. I don't know whether it's reached people, but these are the constraints that we adhere to now across. Right. Again, for us, we did not allow it to contaminate in ultra short, low duration, short banking PSU. We don't buy perpetuals in many of these bond funds. We don't buy low risk, high risk bonds in these funds. So 95% of our AUM did not get contaminated because of the credit crisis. Okay. In fact, benefited because, it led to higher spreads for the credits, and therefore net we made money. because of the sovereign curve, and the base curve actually drifted lower. Yet, I am fine people running a credit-oriented low-duration fund as long as he puts it out, for public consumption that, look, I run a high credit low-duration fund. I am very likely to deliver about 100 basis point more than that of Birla's low duration in good times. But hey, in bad times, I will do 3% or 4% lower, but that's fine. People will actually.
So I guess for a distributor, the sort of call to action is, although the fixed income space already has 16 categories, which a lot of us think is, too many. For us to sort of advise our clients appropriately, we should ask from the AMCs, not just what is the, which duration bucket it's going into, but also what's the credit risk bucket. So between high and low. So if I look at a fact sheet from Aditya Birla, which says this is my short-term plan, then I shouldn't be satisfied with that. I say, okay, short-term, I understand the duration aspect, but I'm asking you to categorize between high risk and low risk. And then based on my client profile, I decide, what is it that I want to recommend. So that's the additional question that we should ask from fund managers. Great. You mentioned about some of the learnings, and you also were a little worried that we may be learning some, many right things, but also some not so right things. So what are these not so right things that we may be learning and taking away from this crisis?
The big picture wrong is for God's sake, please telegraph this well, that, fixed income has done tremendous good, to the investors. Most funds across the industries have delivered substantially superior returns to that of alternates, okay, including fixed deposits. So, at least at a prima facie level, let's not conclude that fixed income is bad. We don't have the propaganda machine that the equity fund managers have, by the way. Okay, so therefore, I want you and your colleagues to do that. That's one, okay, big picture. Apart from that, I think the bad learnings could be that as fund managers, we may conclude that what is in it for us to run risk? Okay, look at the one who ran so much risk actually had to shut down. And therefore, we may conclude that it's not worth running that risk. Now, there will be a wrong conclusion. As I tried to explain, that industry today, see, as the fund managers today, while we are great beta players, we have gone underweight credit for last 2 years for the reasons, because we thought that there will be a credit crisis. Yet it is likely that my fund managers and many other fund managers would conclude that let us shun credit forever. Now, that will be a wrong conclusion, because you today are likely to lose substantial spread, by dialing only NABARDs, NHBs, and Government of India and shunning all the AA and AA plus corporates today. So that's one learning or bad learning, that, okay, let's not run any risk. As long as right now we all are risk averse for the right reasons, that risk can materialize, it's fine. But let's not conclude it as a durable strategy. That's one.
Yeah.
Number two strategy, my fear is that, that it is possible that many of you, many fund managers, many managements may conclude that structured finance is bad and vanilla finance is good. It's bad decision. Structured finance, for all the wrong that it may have appeared to you, yet could ensure that, you actually minimize the loss given defaults. Take a classic case of, let's say, again, an ILFS case, which we have, Jharkhand Road Projects. It's a structured finance. It's a AA-SO company originally. Now, when everything that could go bad, went bad there. Yet, we could actually ensure that, we start to get money back as long as, the contract is good, as long as the structure is good. Again, in the case of SL, which much hyped about case, most fund managers could actually ensure could come back. But, what happened to the Dewan Housing's case? What happened to the Reliance Capital, Reliance Home? These contracts or the conclusion of or resolution of these actually are going to take very, very long. So I think a second learning that, vanilla finance and a balance sheet is good and structured finance is wrong, I think is a wrong decision that you and I would make. So these are the bad learnings, I would say.
Okay. You talked about resolution, might take a very long time, and I'm just prompted to look at a question that has come in from Mukesh Taneja. who says, so tell us what's the ideal time horizon for a credit risk fund? So how, we've been talking about 3 years is a time horizon because that's driven by tax. Should we still be looking at 3 years, or should we be looking at a much longer time horizon to allow a whole cycle to play out?
Okay, see, unless a credit crisis pops up, okay, while you are invested, it is going to get somewhat longer. Otherwise, 3 years is a reasonable time frame. Okay, I think that majority of you, if you've stayed invested in credit funds in 5 years, you've had a reasonable performance. Even today, our credit funds in last 5 years, had you invested 5 years ago, you would have earned 7.5% return. So it's fine. But if you invested 2.5 years ago, it's a bad outcome right now, and you ought to stay until this crisis sort of settles down, the spreads settle down, the recoveries come back to all of us, to us and to many other credit funds. My general view is that generally 3 years fine, but if the credit crisis pops out, then you ought to stay maybe about 1 or 2 years longer. This is the same thing for equities, by the way. It's possible that 3, 4, 5 years is reasonable time frame. But if you invest in a January 2008 in equity, you ought to stay longer, because it's just that you got trapped in a bad cycle, so to say.
Sure.
I think 3 years are fine for 90% of the times, but once in a while credit crisis unfolds, you sort of just be patient, and you will get a reasonable returns once you go through the crisis.
Sure. There's another question, Manish, that has come in, and I'm sure you'll love it. It's from Basavaraj M. He says, is it advisable to switch equity funds to fixed income funds in the present situation?
No,
you would love this.
I think I've shared with you, I'm extremely bullish equity. I was actually quite bearish equity throughout 2017 to 19. Okay. And I turned constructive end March because of a variety of reasons. I think I've explained to you, but the virus was timid. I think I'm expecting a large amount of reflation because of central banks and fiscal authorities. I think we'll talk about it later, but don't do that. It's time right now to go overweight equities. Okay. Personally,
so coming from a head of fixed income is quite a statement.
No. Again, the head of fixed income is a position my organization is giving me. If any asset manager does not know all assets, he can't manage any asset you give him.
Correct.
I ought to know commodities. I ought to know currency. I ought to know equities as much as most probably my brothers and sisters in equity side. Otherwise I won't get the government bond right. So this is a fixed income fund manager I do for living. But my favorite.
But the intellect takes in a lot more than that. I understand, and which brings me to the part of the conversation that I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you, which is the macro perspective. Obviously, the most important thing we're dealing with is really the COVID issue, and in what way might it impact growth? In what way might it impact inflation, the economy, etc. What's your thinking now on this?
See, COVID-19, of course, I think I'm not going to discuss much of a bad news because everyone knows it, okay, that, it's going to mean an unprecedented drawdown of growth. The world will most probably degrow at 6%, inflation will be 0. Everything has been well telegraphed by many economists and analysts. I want to give you a perspective that finally, this is a virus, okay? It's an event-led collapse that we are experiencing. Okay.
Yeah.
It is not it's not a structural collapse. Very soon in 6-8 months time, you'll have reasonable meds. In about a year's time, you will have vaccines. And then, there'll be a clawback of growth. So
Correct.
If you are an investor in anything, including real estate and equities, think of this now as a cumulative 2020 and 2021 growth. Okay. Don't bother about 2020. Everyone knows it's collapsed. Okay. Because we all are sitting at home, not consuming anything, discretionary, of course, would result in sharp collapse in the activity. So first thing, try and get big picture that while it is a very, very bad news in short run, okay, but it is going to make, as it did happen after Spanish flu, okay, it would have absolutely very little influence on the overall growth of the world. okay, over next 2 to 3 years time. So the total growth sacrifice that I see in the world is not more than 1 or 2% if I cumulate 20 to 21 and 22. Okay, that's one. Number two is that, this virus has given an opportunity to our central banks and to, more importantly, to the governments to respond to it ferociously. Okay.
Yeah.
It's unprecedented, in the manner
Absolutely.
the response is coming in from our friends in America. And then now it's, of course, is happening everywhere, including to a certain extent in India. I think, people are underestimating it. The central bank, like think of a Fed, its balance sheet in about 6-8 months time will be 11-12 trillion dollar.
Correct. Unimaginable.
From $4 trillion less than 6 months ago. On a $20 trillion economy, he's adding 35-40%. The Fed balance sheet is, bloating to that extent. Imagine the same thing were to happen in India. It's equivalent of 70 lakh crore of money printing in India, if it were to happen in India. Of course,
it don't happen. Yeah.
So in a sense, what is happening right now is that virus is hurting us very badly, but there is going to be a quick clampback of the sort of growth in 2021 once we recover from this trauma, and we will recover from this trauma very, very quickly. So it's not a durable one. And then because it is being assisted by a ferocious and in terms of size, unprecedented response from governments across the world, including central banks. My sense is that, the big picture is that there's going to be a massive reflation in the world in next couple of years. That's my big
picture. So will that reflation also mean reflation of asset prices like we saw in 2009, 2010?
Absolutely. This reflation is going to be, I would say, somewhat different than what we've seen during 2015-18. I think large money will be put to use in building infrastructure in both Western world, China, and to a certain extent in India. I think it's a bit of a pro-old economy because, government, when they spend, they do a good job in spending on infrastructure. You can't expect government to build BPOs and IT companies, okay? But they can build roads and dams, okay? So that's what's going to happen across the world. And then, this large amount of money, think of India, 8.5 lakh crore of money every day sloshing around in the system, parking itself at 375, which is likely to go lower. Your 1-year T-bills are trading, until yesterday, were trading 25 basis points below that rate. 3.5% is the T-bill rate. So that's the kind of response which has come in from central banks. And
you talked about responses from central bank. There's just one concern that I'm picking up from the last 3 days, the various conversations. There was a lot of optimism about our 20 lakh crore fiscal stimulus package that the Prime Minister announced. Now I'm sensing a little bit of disappointment because most of that stimulus, unlike the Western world where they put money into the hands of the consumer and companies, here it seems to be more of enabling, as in allowing people to borrow so that they can continue doing their business. It's not really putting money either into the consumer's hand or into a manufacturer's hand. So to what extent is our stimulus really a stimulus, and can we expect a nice, lovely asset price rally in India as well?
No, you would expect, you have to, keep the thank you note for Fed, okay, first of all. Okay, your asset prices have very little to do with what RBI does and lot more to do with what Powell does, okay? So, at least know who to thank, okay, first of all, okay? Now let's get back to the serious one here. It is true that our fiscal response has been somewhat underwhelming. Yeah. It is, okay, so far. You have typical emerging market constraints. While I admit, and I have these quibbles with policymakers all the time, that I think we are being too orthodox and I mean, in the name of prudence, actually, we are not responding as much as we should. But I think we're going to get this right. I think, broadly speaking, when I speak to people in North Block as well as in Mint Street, I think they get this right, and I think they will respond. Yet, don't expect a response as you've seen in US and couple of other Western countries. Their currencies are real sovereign, okay? They can spend amount that you cannot imagine. Yet I have to admit here that Look, even in the case of US, the true fiscal in terms of outlay is only 7 or 8%. Okay, rest is all in the form of guarantees. In the case of UK also, I think the number is going to be closer to 4.5%, and rest is all about guarantees.
Yes. Okay.
Look, for the policymakers, Vijay, there are three things to deal with right now. First is healthcare, okay, which we all discussed and we know this. Second is financial stability. We must ensure that the catastrophe which is playing out in what do you call it, real economy does not cross-contaminate the financial sector.
Right.
Our ask in 2008 was opposite. In 2008, we ought to do everything to ensure that the problem in Wall Street does not enter Allahabad. Now, reverse is true. That, you know, the Allahabad and Udaipur does not enter Bombay's financial market, that, you know, people start to default. So, financial stability is what we must achieve through sort of building a big firewall, which, you know, I think most governments, including in India, I was very, very happy with, you know, what Finance Minister put out, you know, in terms of that 3 lakh crore package. It's a big deal for NBFCs, and my view is that, you know, majority of NBFCs problem is behind us. So okay, just get this right. In terms of fiscal response, very small part in India, unfortunately, would be a demand stimulus, maybe 2 to 3%. But majority of the fiscal response that we need right now, desperately, is the response to ensure that financial markets stabilize, that the credit markets stabilize, that the lending standards, which are super tight right now, actually start to ease. That is what, you know, I think this government understands this, RBI understands it, and they're going to achieve it. You know, I think they'll be able to successfully achieve it.
Sure. No, you know, while I would have liked to, you know, ask you many more follow-up questions on the macro, because that's an area of my personal interest. I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in from people who are, you know, watching you and hearing you. A couple of questions very similar are from Harendra Bisht and from Virendra Sharma. What they're looking for is what's the best. So one of them says, what's the best stable income portfolio for retirement portfolio, the stable income fund. The other one says, what's the best debt fund for a retired woman customer with fixed income requirements, etc., with a 5-year horizon. So basically, for retirement money to be consumed during retirement, what within the fixed income suite would you recommend, or even outside the fixed income suite?
Look, you know, let me simplify fixed income. You know, in terms of you know, we sort of course run liquid funds for your, you know, 10-day, 15-day money. We run low duration, ultra short-term funds, the market fund for your 1 to 3 months, 6-month money. But if it's a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year money, then, you know, majority of the times, you know, we advise investors to invest in short-term funds. You know, we have 3 kind of short-term fund. One is short-term fund, corporate bond fund, and banking and PSU. I think, you know, for a general retiree, my advice is to sort of pick up short-term fund, because it does not do the extreme of, you know, being so risk averse as our banking PSU fund is. Okay. Yet it does not stray in the territories of credit funds. Okay. Yeah. So I think it's a bit of a middler. It does not, it's not likely to give you nasty experience as credit funds have given in last 1-2 years. Okay. But it will also not give you the returns that credit funds gave in 2014, 15, 16, 17. Okay. So I think a short-term fund is a good place to sort of park large part of your money. If you are, of course, a speculator, then, you know, gilt and income funds are always there for you because they're long duration.
So we're talking about a retired portfolio. So you're saying stick to short-term and then do an SWP on a short-term fund. And if I were to add from the learnings from the last half an hour, then ask for a short-term fund where you have these governing constraints, you know, where you're saying you're not going to, you know, take undue credit risk. So look for a fund that has that as a constraint.
You know, okay. The point is that, you know, we let us not conclude that the credit funds, you know, is not a good allocation. It's a bad cycle which played out for them. Yet I must insist that some part of your wealth should be allocated to these funds once this big trauma sort of is over. You know, I think it's gotten over, but, you know, you may want to wait for another 3-6 months And don't forget to allocate, small bit of your money, 3, 4, 5% of your allocation should be to these funds. I think that these are legitimate platforms to earn you extra over long periods of time. But just be aware that these risks do materialize once in a while, as they do in every asset class. Yeah.
Sure. So there's another viewer who's posed a question. He's taken your view very seriously about you having to have a view across asset classes and across funds. So Gaurav Quatra has a very pointed question for you. He says, look, your pharma and healthcare fund has given a very good return, almost 19%. Is it time for me to switch from there to your corporate bond fund?
No. Look, again, for an average.
I know it's a tough question for you to answer.
It's not a tough question. I have, specific views on pharma, but I would explain this, here now. My general advice is to be very, very careful in picking up these sector-specific funds, unless you know this in and out of it, okay? It's like a gilt fund, okay? They're going to give you, like my gilt fund gave you 16% return, but it did not find a minute of mention in our conversation, because I do not want you to have a repeat of a 2010s experience.
Yeah.
Do you know when to exit this? So basically, again, a pharma fund or any sector specific fund actually entails a lot more risk, because the beta is a lot more. In a normal diversified businesses funds, there are many balancers. That sometimes pharma is doing, sometimes IT is doing very well, sometimes something else is doing well. In pharma, you're taking a very specific bet, but this man has made good returns, so good luck. And talk to our guys as to what to do. I mean, but let's not make the mistake of undialing pharma and straight away go to the most risk averse category, which is corporate bond fund. This boom bust cycle that we all go through as human beings, that we become so excessively greedy in 2017, thinking that, okay, credit fund is the end game of everything in fixed income, to the point now that, no, I shall not invest in anything but fixed deposit, which is the same thing which is playing out in front of us right now, that, okay, let me get into pharma and then, quickly corporate bond.
Sure, absolutely. The other angle is also about maintaining an asset allocation discipline, because one is equity, one is fixed income. You ought to see what the asset allocation for the client demand. I have finally a question for you, Manish, on macro. So it allows me to go back to where I wanted the discussion to be. Sunil Kamdar has a question for you. He says, sir, there is a global stimulus of more than $8 trillion. This will generate a lot of liquidity globally. Secondly, India government borrowing is increasing. What will be the effect on interest rates due to these factors? So both the things, one is global liquidity and the fact that India's borrowing is increasing substantially. How do you see interest rates scenario playing out?
Look, I'll give you a big picture, okay, that most probably India's nominal GDP this year would actually degrow. Nominal GDP, I'm not talking of real GDP, nominal, meaning inflation will be near zero and growth will be negative. Now, in that environment, basically 1 year T-bills, even at 375, 380 where they are right now, are actually very high. How can you have 1 year sovereign higher than the nominal GDP growth?
Yeah.
So much higher. So the real rates, despite the fact that the interest rates have fallen so substantially, people have to appreciate that the real rates have not fallen. They've actually risen in India. If you look at the potential inflation, you saw the US's inflation print last week, the numbers are going to be very low in terms of inflation, that you've not seen for long time. And therefore, interest rates in India, unfortunately, at least in near term, for wrong reasons, of course, but will have to come down. Right. If you get this principle right now in the catastrophe that we are in, the only way to solve the problem or the mess of a borrower is to transfer income from a saver to borrower. Okay. So right now, the corporates and all the borrowers are struggling in a significant manner because their earnings are diminished right now. So you have to reduce the burden on them. How do you transfer income to them? Majority of that is going to be from your savings that you will earn a lot less this year. so that they can actually save a little more there. So that's the financial stability, the paradigm of financial stability, just the transfer of income. So my big picture view is that interest rates in India will come down. Yet I advise you to go overweight equity, is because in the end, you don't want to lock your money in an emerging market like India, which is very likely to grow in at least in terms of nominal growth over next 10, 15 years or 5 years at 10, 12% minimum or more. Why would you like to sort of, lock your money in a government bond at 5.5%, 6% right now? So in terms of an investor, my advice is go overweight equity now. In terms of your near-term thing, don't bother, stay in fixed income. Okay, if you're a 6-month, 12-month investor, because you're going to make a reasonable real return there. If you're a speculator, then of course buy bonds, because RBI is going to buy from you at 50 basis points, 75 basis points lower from here. So the answer to this question is many.
Is very nuanced, and I think as you very correctly put it out, if you have a long-term horizon, go on front foot. You should not be on back foot if you have a long-term horizon. If you have a short-term horizon, yes, be circumspect. This is not the time to try and dance down the wicket and try to hit the ball. The pitch is not conducive. And well, if you're a speculator, then you've just given people who want that short-term punt in fixed income space exactly the soundbite that they wanted to hear. Thank you very much, Manish. Very, very engaging conversation. As usual, always a pleasure to understand your views. I'm sure all of us have benefited tremendously from your insights, and we'll go back to our businesses with a lot more clarity on how do we handle this animal called fixed income that is bothering us a lot in recent days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.